Thank you, Carla. I might mention that our foundation, the Ford family, doesn't get involved in policy except for the Chalkboard Project, which is about K through 12 educational systems. But maybe we can get the Northwest Area Foundation to gather our thousands of graduates and their friends to change something that's annoying you here in Megan?
So I'm Megan Shoemaker with the Oregon Community Foundation, and on your programs you probably saw Kathleen Cornett, but she couldn't be here today. And you may be familiar with my predecessor in this role, the head of the Community Grant Program, which was Jeff Anderson, and he's now the Chief Operating Officer at OCF. Our foundation has been around for nearly 40 years now, and we represent the combined philanthropy of about 1,600 donors. And it's a wonderful thing. We serve all of Oregon, and that's an interesting, especially for the program I lead, the Community Grant Program, which is our broadest, most accessible grant program. That's an interesting thing to do because what applications look like varies considerably, and the needs from, region to region, county to county, city to city, town to town. So I've learned a lot in the last year. The story that I'm going to tell you is a little bit different because I may have misunderstood the directions. Sorry about that. So I'm going to talk to you about not really a successful grant, but rather a successful grant request. And maybe I just had my head in the wrong space, but I've been doing grant workshops for the last couple of weeks, so I'm focused on helping nonprofits understand what's a good grant request. So that's how I approach this. So here's I have a couple stories, but so the first one I wanted to talk about was a few months ago, we received a grant request from a nonprofit, a 25-year-old nonprofit in a rural community that works to aid homeless populations, and historically has done so quite well. The kinds of services provided are food, clothing, that kind of thing. But this request that they submitted to us was really for a whole different kind of program. They were starting to shift toward more preventive work and wanted to do something wholly different. And so I wanted to talk with you a little bit about, give you sort of a peek into how we look at these kinds of things, because it's, no application is perfect. They just aren't. And so don't feel like you have to be perfect. Obviously, we weren't able to do that for you. So there were strengths and there were weaknesses. And so as a foundation, we really wrestled with it. And, one of the strengths that we saw was that this organization had been around for a long time and had done a really good job. We really liked the fact that its board was heavily engaged in its work and had actually was seeking to strengthen its skills. I don't know if you're familiar with a nonprofit called Financial Stewardship Resources. Is that familiar to you? It's a nonprofit based in Philomath that really works with, helps the nonprofit boards around governance and things like that. And I know the Ford Family Foundation's done a lot to help nonprofits, and OCF's jumped on that bandwagon. And anyway, this board was really strengthening its skills. The need being addressed by this was really strong. There was no other program of this sort in this county. In fact, the program was going to serve one county and part of another county. And so it was really filling an important gap. And it's a fairly small organization in terms of staff, 6 staff, 4 FTE. The organization had done a good job of using past grants from OCF. Not that we expect every grant we make to be successful. But we do like to see that if something doesn't go wrong, the nonprofit's able to adapt. And this organization had done a good job. So there were all these things that were good in place, we liked, but some things not in place yet. The planning was still coming together. You know, potential partners had been identified, conversations begun, but it had not all gelled. That was a bit problematic. About 60% of the funds had been raised if you included the in-kind support that they anticipated getting. And given their history, I thought, they probably will get it. But it wasn't in place yet. And given that we're in a recession, it's very competitive. You know, we'll get 300 applications a cycle and be able to award maybe 100. So, you know, they had a lot of fundraising to do. So there's a question of, are they going to be able to do this, to pull this off? They had barely begun their local fundraising, which is critical. But I got to say, on the other side of that, this organization was amazing. I mean, they typically got about 85% of their operating support from their local community, which is really fantastic. So I'm thinking, well, okay, you know, I think they have barely begun, but I'm thinking they'll probably be able to come through on the local fundraising. All the foundations they were approaching were going to make their decisions at about the same time. So, yeah, what can I do about that? So, you know, we really wrestled with it. I liked that they weren't reinventing the wheel. They thought about what they wanted to do, identified another nonprofit that was doing something like this, went and visited, really looked closely at that model, and decided to adopt that model, tweaked it a little, and I thought in smart ways to make good use of the resources where they were. And but this was really, a tough decision. They weren't really where we would have hoped. But, you know, you can see the sort of positive, negatives, and in the end, we decided to take a leap of faith. And sometimes that's what's required. But we decided those partnerships were going to come together, that local fundraising was going to be successful. And although this was a totally new venture for this organization, a program of a sort they'd never done before, that they could pull it off, that the staff and the board were seeking the kind of skill building that they were going to need. And it was, I guess you could say, a success story. I don't know if all that's going to happen, but I think it will. It was successful from our perspective in that, you know, we awarded it funds. Then a little story I was going to say, or sort of a comment, really. It's not really a story, but so this cycle, during the recession, we have recession guidelines in place, at least for one more grant cycle through the end of 2011. And during the recession, so we're doing some bridge funding during the recession. Sort of the counterbalance to that is that we're doing less capital grant making. It's never been a huge part of our community grant program, but we've always funded some capital projects. Less of it, though, unless an organization is really close to getting all the funds they need for a project. Well, this spring, we ended up funding 4 really community facilities in the state, in rural areas of the state. And I found myself looking at that thinking, well, that's odd. How did we get in that position? That is not what we would have, you know, that's not where I would have thought we would have decided to go. But, you know, I think what really struck me, I mean, I tend to think of projects in terms of, is this really addressing the most or a very, very important community need from my perspective? And I decided I really needed to check my sort of maybe metro shoes at the door. If it is the project that is galvanizing the community, then it's very much worth our time to take a hard look at it, whether it's the most important community need or not. if it's what's bringing the community together, what's interesting them now. So just another sort of sense for success. So, by the way, there are materials over there. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about our program or other programs. There's also a booth in the other building that has a lot of material about OCF. So if you're interested, thanks.
Thank you, Meg. Thank you, Megan. The Oregon Community Foundation and its advised funds are going to be more and more important to rural Oregon over the years. We're just really starting to get organized with them. Several communities already have advised funds. Cynthia?
Yeah. So I think Megan and I have a similar story, which is great. So I'm Cynthia Adams with the Collins Foundation, and I too left materials over on the side of the room there. And as some of you may know, the Collins Foundation dedicates its funding to the state of Oregon, and we make grants around the state in many rural areas. I've been with the foundation for about 12 years, and one of the things I get to do is go around the state and meet with community leaders, nonprofit leaders, to learn about the projects they're working on, the projects that have galvanized the community and that are bringing them together around important needs. So by virtue of the way the Collins Foundation works, which is as a responsive grant maker, I often go out to communities to hear about projects, pursue questions with them about their readiness to take on a project, about how many people in the community are involved in it, about what else they need to do and how much more they need to raise, about what they're really excited about with this project and what they may be a little concerned about. And I'm often talking to board members and to staff members and sometimes to mayors or city managers, people that may be involved in a particular project. And so I listen to those stories, and we go back and we have a board meeting and decisions are made, and then a year later we get a report, and I really rarely get to go back and actually see a project where I've had a visit and where a big project might have been undertaken. And it's so sad that so much good work happens, and many times I don't get to see it because we're on the front end. But the story I have to share with you is about an organization where I did have the opportunity to go back. And is it okay if I talk about it? Can I share the name of the organization? Absolutely. Okay, so I don't want to make Dave Hughes embarrassed because he's sitting in the back of the room. But Dave Hughes is the executive director of Agape House, which is in Hermiston. And in 2004, I went to Hermiston to talk with Dave about a community warehouse they were building that was to house food and home supplies and furniture and all kinds of things focused on Agape's mission, which is to serve the basic needs of the people in Morrow and a portion of Umatilla County. And they'd been doing that for a long time, and it was really an all-volunteer organization except for the paid executive director and maybe a couple of part-time staff, but very small.